Okay, so wanted to start here, Ashley, just thinking about leadership development today, and we were thinking about this session and what we've been hearing over the last 12 months, 18 months in terms of conferences, customers that we talk with, articles that we read. We've got three truths about leadership development today that are seemingly truths according to everybody we talk to, every article we read, and I want to dig into each one of these. You know, individually, but it is anything jump out when you see that on the screen, like, hey, these are the three truths about leadership development today. Do you think there is a consensus among L&D right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Ryan. I think like the three things that we hear the most from a leadership perspective are, is it skill based? How do we measure skills? What is that return on investment in terms of skills, or where our current culture with skills at, and how is it affecting our leadership? And then how can AI help, or what are we doing with AI? I think the most common thing through conferences, everyday meetings is, can we do this with AI? What are we doing with AI?
Yeah,
How is AI affecting this?
for sure.
How can we do more with AI? So I think that these are very, very relevant and something that we're hearing about constantly in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think they are all tied together as well, right? You have all of those pieces of like, can we use AI for this? How do we show ROI, as it relates to anything that we're doing in L&D? And, really, really excited to hear more and, give the audience some insight into, Capgemini's program and the approach that you all have taken.
And not just that, but I think if we think about it too, how do we do it faster?
Yeah.
Right. I think that's like the most common thing I hear as well. Is like, how fast can we do that? Or how quick can you get this out as well?
Yeah, there's a lot to that, and it's interesting when the first truth that we have, that everyone's going skill based. One of the stats that we see, 81% of companies are hiring and promoting based on skills. So, whenever we talk with anybody, it's, hey, what we want to do is we want to align skills and competencies to actual job openings. With the advancement of AI and all of the changes in technology that we're seeing, one thing that is very aspirational that I love to hear from L&D learners is this idea of, we know technology is going to replace skills that our team members have, but what we want to do is we want to focus on upskilling them. Is that something you guys think about at all at Capgemini in terms of like, hey, technology will change, how do we start upskilling people now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's two things when I think about being skill based. I think role titles mean less and less from a day to day basis now. So it's really like, what skills make up that role, or what are those transferable skills, and then what are your career skills? So we're doing a lot of things about career skills and what that means for different people at different points in their career. So everything we're looking at is skill based, as well as how do we make sure that we can measure those skills? So, what are the levels that people are at? How can we accelerate that? Or how can we track where somebody needs to be from a certain skill standpoint within their role, too? I think that when it comes to skills, the tricky part really is that you could have tons of skills. Like there's all different types of skills you can have, and what's the skills that you need at that moment, especially with how fast technology is evolving. So, if we think about cybersecurity a few years ago, everybody wanted cybersecurity skills. Now, a lot of
Mhm.
technology does what people used to be able to do from a cybersecurity standpoint. So,
Sure.
how do we evolve quickly to those in need skills and stay relevant with the times as well? So, I think that that's a huge part of being skill based and continuing to try to evolve as the technology evolves too.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to that, especially thinking about, your cybersecurity example, mapping skills directly to business outcomes. There was a very tangible threat in cybersecurity, to a lot of companies and businesses. How do we keep our data safe? How do we protect ourselves and our most important assets? So in thinking about that, as business outcomes and needs change, mapping skills directly to that, I think that's a really big driver that we see as well. Kind of shifting to the second one, AI is changing the game. And I don't know that there's going to be a lot of disputing that AI is in fact changing the game. How it's changing the game, there's a lot of conversation around that. You talked about speed at the very beginning. How do we move faster? AI is definitely reducing the time it takes to develop and train employees. Do you see really specific examples of that where you're using AI in places maybe that you hadn't previously?
Yeah, I think that there's a few places that we're really using AI that we weren't before. I think it's pushing content to people. So, using our LXP in terms of how we push content based off of what their targeted skills are. So, how we
Yeah.
do that in terms of AI. I think language is a huge one for us. So things where we used to have like months to do different languages or being able to translate into different languages, we're able to do that a lot faster, which also accelerates the time and enables our people to learn in their native language, which is a big benefit too. So we can have less SMEs or less people validating that and like being able to produce it faster. And then I just think it's the pace that we can actually get learning out. So
Mhm.
many times in the past, I think that it is, we start building a program and, 6 months later, the actual objectives have changed of what we
Yeah,
really needed.
yeah.
But that's just what the outcome, it's what the objectives were at the beginning. And that's what it took to code and to get agreement and to get, testing done. Where now with a lot of these different tools, which like one I know you're going to show us later, which we're very excited about, right?
Yeah.
But we're able to get them out faster and really meeting those objectives in a more in the moment time, which I think is A, keeping people upskilled better, and B, letting us move faster too to like different upskilling needs as well.
Yeah, thinking about that last point, moving faster to different upskilling needs, I think, leveraging AI for, skills data analysis, that's something that we do at ETU. And it's something that we really push people to do because I think that, you know, thinking about this, new reality of being nimble and moving quickly and what the needs are, being able to identify where do the gaps exist, where are we weaker, what's a new business challenge that we're facing, and then how do we look at where those gaps exist and fill them quickly. I think using AI to take like large pieces of data or large sets of data to come to some of those conclusions of where do we go next. I think that that's a really important piece, especially on the slide that we have, 4 and 5 workers feel like their skills can't keep pace with AI acceleration. I think like management teams, executive teams, they feel the same way where, I was in a conversation with an executive earlier today where he had basically said our executive team doesn't know what skills we need to have. It's all moving too quickly. So, we identify a gap and then there's a new skill that comes up. So I think using AI to determine, all right, what are the gaps that are currently, in our organization, and then how do we fill that? I think that's something that's a little bit untapped right now. All right, well, so we've got a poll for the audience here, and I just would love to see, is your company using AI tools to help develop your leaders at all? Because I mean, everyone's using AI to a certain extent, but I'm going to go ahead and push this poll to the audience. So let's see if this comes through. All right, great. So it's out there. So yeah, is this is it yes? Is it a little bit or not at all? And I think what's interesting here is if it was is your company started to use AI or experiment with AI, I think it would be 100% yes. But from a leadership development perspective, I'm not sure if people are there yet. So let's see
Or just
here.
a learning standpoint as well. I think some, that businesses are using it across the board, maybe, but are you using it for learning too?
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Like if it's not, yeah, take it back a step, right? Like is it, in
Yeah.
learning at all, much less, in developing leaders. I think too, for what AI is and what AI does, one thing that I hear a lot is, can't Chat GPT do it? So, on a previous slide, we talked about the different types of AI and the different use cases there. I think there's, generative AI and what that use case is specifically, but then there's, the broader AI. And I'm not very technical myself, and it's very interesting to talk with people on the technical side to say like, well, yes, here's what you can do as a user, and here's what we can do from a technology perspective. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, kind of some of the things that we're doing at ETU to leverage AI with some of our competency mapping and things like that. But we'll give it just another minute here for people who want to submit to the poll as well. Oh, this is interesting. A great question in the chat. What methods or rating systems would you recommend, and would you consider using AI itself for evaluation? That's a really great question. So, thinking about what are the metrics that matter, and I certainly have kind of my take on it and the ETU take. I'm curious from your perspective, Ashley, like how do you think about that? Like what metrics are you using for stuff like that?
Absolutely. I think it's very dependent from company to company and on company culture and to like how much we trust it. We do a lot of self-declaration at Capgemini, just from or like a manager like checkpoint too, of validating those skills, or a project manager validating those skills as well. My personal opinion is technology alone can't validate skills, but I do think that there are ways that it could give learners or employees a really good idea of where they're at and where they should progress to.
Mhm.
I know that that was a it depends kind of answer,
Yeah.
typical closing answer,
No,
right?
I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? And the technology alone, there's something to it because you can understand it or you can have the skill, but if you're not demonstrating it in your job, that like that's something that it doesn't really matter. One thing that we like to do when we do a lot of benchmarking for our customers to determine where people at is give them the opportunity to measure their own self-assessment. What is the confidence versus the actual competence, and seeing what gaps exist there. And oftentimes we find patterns where it's there are teams or geographic divisions that won't have something specific. So I think there finding a baseline is always a great place to start. But to your point, how do you marry that with on the job performance, manager review, peer review? Like that, there's a lot more that's there. All right, let's go to some of the polls here. All right, so interesting distribution. So in developing leaders, we've got a little less than 25% are yes, using AI from that perspective, and then everybody else is kind of either maybe just a little bit or not at all. And I think that doesn't surprise me necessarily, right? Like I think there are very much kind of the low-hanging fruit with AI and with generative AI, and how do we use this for things from an automations perspective, making things more efficiently. But I don't know that everyone's there quite yet, and I'm really excited to get into moments that matter, because I think that this is going to be a great example of how you can start in using AI from a leadership perspective. All right, so truth number 3, leadership skill validation is the first step to showing ROI. And, I think broadly what I've heard at every conference I've been at in the last year is very much, how do we tie ROI to our leadership development? Because I think that, there are people from the business side of things that'll very much look black and white, what is the outcome here? And, how do I know that something worked? And very broadly, that's where people start. I guess, thinking about that skill validation piece, when you're talking about moments that matter internally at Capgemini and showing the ROI on something like that, is that where you start, or do you think about it differently?
No, I definitely think, and I think to give some examples of what we're looking at is with our leadership trainings, especially the one that are offering practice, right? So that our managers specifically are ready, or our leaders are specifically ready for certain scenarios or certain conversations. So one way that we're really looking at this in terms of measurement is attrition. How many people are staying because they're happy with company culture? That's people that you don't have to onboard, or hiring costs, or taking time to interview as well. So how are our attrition looking? And then we also have employee feedback surveys that go out once a month. So we have specific questions targeted to that leadership. So if our people are ready to go and have that skill, then we call them pulse, but our surveys should stay high, that people are satisfied as well. So we really try to make those correlations in terms of leadership skills and the return on investment in terms of like what we're pumping in from a leadership objective. And then those leadership skills also, as a consulting company specifically, it's how much do our clients trust us? Is the client satisfaction there? Are we able to lead projects? So we're not looking at direct parallels, I would say, but how as a culture and how well are we doing, I would say is our big return of investment, and like where we can market, because sometimes it is a little harder from a learning standpoint to really be able to make those comparisons.
Yeah, when you think about attrition and what that could do, especially for an organization like Capgemini, and you talked about that client trust. If you were to lose, like I mean, your talent is obviously your most valuable asset. So if you were to lose a lot of trusted advisors, I mean, like that puts the client relationships, that puts some of the business at risk. And sometimes it's not as binary as like, hey, we invested in this and our stock price went up, or our revenue went up, or something like that. But thinking about over time, having the longer tenured employees that feel like they've been invested in, they're deploying those skills, they're growing the accounts, they're managing those relationships. There's a lot to that. And I think having having those proof points, to be able to say, all right, look at the consistency across, there's great feedback from learners, the job satisfaction scores are high, customer satisfaction scores are high, and, here's what the business outcome was. I think building that story is really critical. So in saying but you're starting with, hey, we're going to validate that, this is what we did and it worked. And so, there's never one piece that's there, but, being able to look at linking the training to skills, I think is a good place to start.
Absolutely.
All right. So, I'm curious, and we can, kind of keep this going throughout the presentation, but, for everybody in that previous poll, what AI tools are people using for leadership development? And, I saw on the attendee list, there's a couple ETU customers in there, so we'll take a shout out from any of them as well. But, I'm curious for anybody, in the audience, if there are AI tools that they like, for L&D, for sharing resources and best practices and things like that, we would love to see that and, kind of come back to that in a couple minutes. Got another poll here for the audience as well. So, how confident are all of you that your current leadership programs are preparing future ready leaders? And it's a little bit of a loaded question, right? Given all of the changes that we see in technology and just, kind of like the broader economy and how fast things are changing. But I am curious if, this is where people feel like, yes, we're very confident, we're moving in the right direction, we're investing in our people versus, maybe something else. So I'll go ahead and push this one to the crowd here.
It's my favorite buzzword. It's future ready. I use it probably 1,000 times a day. It's my absolute favorite.
I like that one. I like that one a lot. And I think too that there's, what I really like about future ready is, there's a nod to doing things the way we're doing them today it's not going to look the same. So, we're not just building skills, but we're also building competencies like around a lot of technology and change for, where a company is going. So I think I like that too. All right, we see some answers coming in through the chat here. All right, we'll give it just another couple seconds here to see if we get some additional poll answers. But thank you to everybody answering in the poll. And thanks to everybody answering through the question. I see like a lot kind of going back and forth and, people asking specific questions about AI and things like that. All right, let's take a look at some of our poll results here. Okay. This distribution doesn't surprise me. I would say, kind of the majority in that middle box, somewhat confident, right? And I think, there's obviously a lot of work that goes into, current leadership programs, preparing future ready leaders, with some of it being unknown, that there's always going to be some hesitation. But I do like that almost 20% are very confident, because I think, that shows that people are thinking about technology, and I think they're thinking about, business objectives and business needs in the right way. I don't know, anything surprise you with those numbers, Ashley?
No, I don't know if I could ever say I was very confident, right? I love that when people are like, we're very confident, which I need somebody to throw some confidence at my way, right? But I think that it's about how we continue to evolve, right? And how we continue to prepare people to be future ready, and what that looks like, and what that looks like for different personas and different, generations in the workforce too. And I think that there's so much that goes into it, and it's exciting to see all of the new developments that are happening in learning, but also especially in leadership learning.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit and start talking about, the Capgemini's approach to, leadership development in the Moment That Matters program. For the audience, what I'd like to do is just show a quick example of what a simulation looks like. So what you see here on screen is a screenshot from the Capgemini simulation. Due to the privacy and things like that, we're not going to actually show some of their simulation. We're going to show you an example of ETU, but this is actually created with AI synthetic media. So, what's really kind of fun about that technology specifically is just seeing how quickly it evolves. And, when when we show demonstrations of media that is synthetically generated, oftentimes people don't notice. They say, okay, who are these actors? Can we make sure that we get them again? But, it's really great. You talked about language translations and how fast that can move. Using AI generated characters also makes that process a lot easier, where you can have that consistent experience for everybody in their own native language. So it's very cool. That I know that was what the Capgemini team used. I'm just going to show a quick clip, and the clip is an example of an ETU simulation scene, so we can sort of set the stage of the type of work that we did for Capgemini. It's going to really just show the coach come in and give you an example of a scene that would happen in an L&D program. You're going to be put to a decision that'll move really quickly, and in this particular case, it's going to be a clip of a coach giving you good feedback in selecting the right answer, and sort of what that optimal decision looks like. So I think that's a good baseline for everybody in the audience, as they get a sense of, all right, what did the simulations look like for Capgemini?
Welcome to the simulation on human-centered leadership. My name is Amira, and I'll be your guide. In this scenario, you'll play the role of a manager in a professional services company called Elite Teams. The CEO of Elite Teams announced at the town hall this morning that due to declining revenue, the company will need to undergo a restructure. As a manager, you were informed that your entire division will be dissolved by the end of the quarter, and all employees will be reassigned to other divisions within the company. You have been reassured that everyone's job is safe and that no one will be let go. To avoid confusion or panic, senior leaders have asked all managers to quickly meet with their teams after the town hall to give a brief update and then to follow up with one-on-one meetings. You've scheduled a meeting with your team, Donna, Hector, and Stefan, to break the news. You will need to explain the situation, reassure them that their jobs are safe, and answer any questions they might have. The team has just joined you in the meeting room.
There you are, Stefan. We were just about to message you.
Hi, Stefan.
Hi, all. Sorry I'm a little late. I had to send off an email to an important client.
In this instance, you're given the choices to select.
Oh, that's such a relief.
It sure is.
Yeah, but there's going to be a big change, right?
That was a positive approach to a potentially worrying situation. You made Stefan feel relaxed about being late, and you assured your team that their jobs were safe. Now, how will you respond?
Okay, so just a quick, kind of level set for the audience there, and what a simulated experience looks like. So, in that particular case, it was, notes of a large company change, employees who were concerned about their jobs and the go forward, and you had the coach character that was on screen there. And what's comes up for the learner as they go through a simulation is that they're given choices that are optimal, suboptimal, or potentially incorrect. And from there, there's, branching technology that gives them their own unique journey. So you really get a sense of where people are at in terms of the skills that they have and how things would work in there. With that, I'd love to talk about, Capgemini's program, the Emerging Leaders Program and the moments that matter. So I really just want to start big picture, thinking about the skills first approach to leadership. Walk us through what this actually looks like and where this program started.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a very strong culture of leadership, I would say, at Capgemini since I've been there, and I've been there for a long time now. And we really believe at Capgemini that everyone is a leader. Like, it is part of our leadership vision that's broken into 5 parts, but that from all grades standpoint, that everyone's a leader, whether you're a leader from an SME standpoint, a people leader, an executive leader, but that everyone is a leader. And it's important to us at Capgemini that we are constantly growing those leadership skills. When we were evaluating our portfolio of offerings, we realized that we had a big gap in terms of leadership, though, from our first-time leaders. So we have a great middle management leadership program. We offer a lot of high-performing talent development leadership programs and executive leadership programs. But what about our first-time leaders? What does leadership look like for somebody for the first time, regardless if they're maybe switching from being an SME leader to a people leader, or vice versa, or they're stepping into this new role from a leadership standpoint? And we realized that we didn't have that. So that was the moment of need of what do we do? How do we approach this? and what is going to be the best outcome of it. All of this was happening while we were moving to this skills first approach too.
Yeah.
So our first step was really, what are the skills that that first time leader needs? What are the situations that truly matter and the skills that they need to be ready? So we really started there of trying to identify what we thought that those important baseline first time skills were and how we could measure those, grow those, but put our employees in scenarios where they could actually use those skills. To us, when we were thinking about the program, it was really important that not only that they had theory of what the skill was or why it was important, that they had, but that they also had practice, that they could actually get hands-on with this skill and fail in a safe environment, right? Yeah. That we didn't want them failing for the first time in these actual scenarios when you're doing it face to face with somebody, that they actually had an opportunity to fail and to get feedback. Like if somebody was failing at this, that was the point of it. We wanted them to have that. So then that they felt supported. So it was really about like, how could we do all of those things in one program, in something that was in the flow of work, that we weren't taking people out and spending a whole week face to face. We also are very large geographically. So how could we accomplish what our goals were with something that was light but interactive and something that like brought a lot of attention to it as well?
Yeah, there's so much there that I like. I think first broadly, where you think about everyone's a leader, right? And I think what happens to so many people, and so many people, I mean, everyone wants to grow in their career. So many people are ambitious. People have leadership aspirations just across the board, and getting into leadership, that first step can be so difficult. And when you say like, hey, how do I get leadership experience if I've never been a leader before, right? Like that's a tough place to start. And, knowing that there's a lot of investment that goes into, people at a professional services firm like Capgemini, it's the kind of thing where if somebody's there for 2 or 3 years and they feel like they haven't been moved on to a leadership track, they'll look around. Whereas really it's, hey, we've invested a lot in you. You're a very important asset. We think you're all leaders. Like there's a lot here. So I think that's a really refreshing way to think about things from the beginning. Talk a little bit more about that safe space, right? Because I think, especially knowing how client-facing the organization is in general, where did that stem from? Just this idea of having a safe space. I mean, was that trial and error? Was that, just from previous learnings? Where did that come from?
I think it was a bit from both. So when we think about learning from a learning landscape at Capgemini too, a big thing that we are trying to embed is in everything is the practice element of it. So practice and the reflection. So how am I practicing? How am I reflecting on this to really grow into that skill? And I think we can all remember back in the day, or even some now, when you're face to face and you're doing those role plays, those are so beneficial, but they're really only beneficial for the person doing it. You have all of these people looking at you or sitting in the audience, but really the person who's benefiting is the person that's in that hot seat. So we really wanted to recreate that, but being able to recreate that from a digital scale in a way that we could train 50,000 people,
yeah,
100 people at a time, and giving people the opportunity to have that safe space. No one is there to monitor you in this too. You can do it as many times as you want. You can always go back and redo it. It's really to see how your responses change or what you can grow from. And I think that that's really what we wanted, of that safe space, that I knew that I had this, no one was monitoring me, no one was looking at my responses, but that I was able to mess up or try or not feel bad about it as well.
Yeah, it's funny, you think about those role-playing exercises that you talked about. I mean, there's always like a performative nature to that too, right? Where everyone's kind of smiling, like a little bit of a wink and nod. I mean, it's maybe not always taken as seriously as need be. And to your point, to everybody who's watching that, they're not getting the same thing out of it. You talked about scale. What have been some of the challenges with that, right? Like knowing that you're a large global organization, thinking about something ambitious. How do you scale something like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think scale is always one of our biggest challenges, especially since the pandemic, of how do we do things digitally more than face to face. It's expensive to get everyone together. There's a lot of studies that say about what actually the reward, the recognition is about face-to-face learning. I'm a big proponent of face-to-face learning. I'm not saying I'm not, but how do you scale all of these people? And I think it was, what can we create, that people wanted to do? How could we generate buzz and excitement about it? which we have done, and I'm very proud of us. Like we have a wait list to get on this program, like constantly. So
That's so
it
cool.
always makes me really happy. But then like that's digitally on demand, that people have it in the time of need. So we're very much about like the right training at the right time for the right skill. And I think that that's really what we've achieved in this, of being able to have it be digital and something that's easy to access. People can access it on their tablet or their phone if they're on the go through our LXP as well. So really just making it available and not putting limitations on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one, the waitlist thing, that's really great, right? Like there's clearly some good word of mouth there. I'm curious, did anything surprise you in feedback that you received? Obviously it sounds like it was mostly positive, but maybe a better question is, anything surprise you in terms of the results for like, what are some of those skills that were the hardest for the first time leaders in going through the program?
Yeah. I mean, from a results standpoint, I'm pretty honest. Ryan's known me for a while. So if the results were terrible, I would tell everybody that they were terrible, right? I think that when we first set up, we were really cautious because this was a new group that we typically don't offer as much to, or it's like curated content, right, through one of our content providers. And I think we were nervous about how their interactions were actually going to be, or are they going to like it, or the choices. And I think we made a lot of specific choices based off of the persona when we were building, especially the simulations with ETU. So like using the synthetic simulations, it looked more like video games. That's a lot of fun, like feedback that we've gotten from this audience, that it felt like a video game. There's a lot of gamification. They get some tokens at some points. So we really tried to play into the preferences of the audience. So we had a nice test group that was with us of like, yeah, we like this. No, we don't like this. I think another big win for us in terms of this was the diversity that the synthetic avatars brought. Being a very large company, the diversity in our company is really important. So we were able to like pick and choose people that had good representation, which I think was really important. In terms of skills standpoint, it was really funny. I was having a conversation because part of the program is that everybody has a mentor. We ask that the mentor is not your manager. So one of the girls who's actually on my team, she was doing the program. She asked me to be her manager. And I was like, I'm already your manager in real life. So I prefer for you to have a different mentor. So she had a different mentor. And I asked her different times, and because she's very honest. She can be very bold. And I was like, what do you think of the program? And she was like, I thought I was going to hate it. Like it was just another program. She was like, but it was fun. And that to me was like one of the best kind of key results that we've heard is obviously they're learning. We can see an increase in skill. The skill report's giving us that. But the feedback is, I wish I had had this earlier. Or even we've given it to some of our new joiner managers who are at a higher level. Like, I wish I would have had this type of training when I started. And they're enjoying going through it. Our completion rate, which is one of the highest, is like 93% of people completing the program when they register. And when we're thinking about 5,000 people in a cohort at a time, that's a really great number. And I think it's just like the way that they appreciate the simulations and that they're available. They're short. They're not like super time consuming, but they can actually see where they're developing and see the feedback when they're not, and being able to redo it and see what could be right as well.
So, when you think about that and you think about the results and what goes into something like that, you talked about spending a lot of time with our team in developing personas. And, for a big part of this conversation, in leveraging AI and leveraging technology for this is spending a lot of time in taking something that's incredibly complex and then distilling it down to something where the feedback is, hey, that was a lot of fun. I wish I had this earlier, and where you're taking 20 to 30 minutes of somebody's time. It's not really an easy thing to do. And I think that, as you think about how you do something like that, I've got this slide up on the screen, and, for the audience, I mean, you're oftentimes starting at the end, what do you want this to look like? What's the business outcome that you're looking to achieve? And then you're taking competencies and mapping competencies to skills, and you're setting the scene, and you've got something that's the context makes sense within Capgemini's business, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So, seeing what that journey looks like on the screen, to get from A to B sounds really complex because there's a lot that goes into it. But I think without the ability to use that technology, deploy it at scale, and make it look simplified, there's it's probably not going to work. So it's an interesting challenge, but I'm curious, the process for you, what surprised you in the process?
Yeah, I think it's actually how fast we actually did this one.
Okay.
I've been in learning design for a really long time. And I think, it's always, especially for a program of what we were trying to achieve with this. Like, it's a complex program. It was a complex build, but especially with the simulations, I think I was most surprised on how fast we actually did them. And I know that you can even do them even faster now. We're like, this is a year and a half ago. But we still got them out. Like, we hit all our deadline dates, we got them out, we were able to make tweaks. I also think what's really nice about this is that since then we haven't had to make a lot of tweaks. I think we did put a lot of effort into making sure that the moments that matter were the right moments that matter. So if you see on the screen, those 4 moments that matter are in the middle. Those are what we really wanted to concentrate on, and that the simulations let people grow their skills on, and they're real to Capgemini. We really wanted it to be like real of like, what is something you're going to encounter and how does that build and how will you react? I do think since a lot of the feedback that we've gotten and from our pulse scores, as these emerging leaders come into middle management, because we're seeing that now from a year and a half,
Cool.
right?
Yeah.
That they are well equipped, that their pulse scores are really good, that they're still with the company, that they're getting good feedback in terms of their people management and their leadership. So I think it's really nice and reflective of what we've done and where we're going with this too. This was also our first time using simulations like this, and now it very much is like, where can we use more? How can we use more?
No, that's so exciting. And you think about, those 3 truths that we had talked about, in the ROI piece, right? And the skill validation from there, what you just said as far as like, hey, we've got people moving into middle management and their scores are high. And, looking back to where something like that starts and, to be able to start giving people with high potential early on access to something like that, where they're being invested in, and then like, hey, they're still with the firm, and they're not only with the firm, but they're thriving, and they're leveraging some of the things that they learned, and it stuck with them. I think like that's so cool from an ROI perspective. You talked about not having to make many tweaks. As you think about 2025, 2026. Are there other skills that, for that first time leader group where you're saying like, hey, this is on our radar, right? Like, maybe there's something else that we need to think about from a development perspective.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where all the skill data comes in, right? Or like we do have some questionnaires as well that they get through, or some evaluation questionnaires that they get through. But where are people failing? And I like to use that word failing, loosely, but where are they failing in this? Is it that they're not able to read from an emotional intelligence, even an avatar as much, right? So is that something that we need to develop further? Or is it that having those difficult conversations is still not quite there, that they know what to do, but they're not giving that back in the right way? So we are looking at where those skill gaps are based off of the skill data, as well as, what we're asking people. And we're constantly asking, people who are moving into that middle management or new ones, like, what are you struggling with? And luckily, they're really happy to tell us. So I can definitely see the program evolving. We've talked about having other moments that matter sitting like outside of this program too, or like, how do we continue to add on to this now? Like, how does this start to evolve, that there are moments matter for like every step of your leadership career? Because this is your first time. What happens at middle management? What's that gap in between too? Like, how does it continue to evolve? So I definitely think we'll see more of those moments that matter and the skills that reflect, but really using the data now and like being truly data driven of where people's skill is and where the gaps are to be able to advance that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because I think what we hear sometimes is that people will think really about learner experience. Did you like it? At that first level, did they do it? Did they like it? And if the answer is yes, oftentimes that's enough. And thinking about, I've got a little bit of the skills data on here, from your team's perspective. You're starting with a cohort that has never really had access to this type of training before. And so seeing, over time, how skills like that improve, I think is always, so interesting, right? Like being, okay, from the very beginning, in some of these areas, these are softer skills, like obviously you're working at Capgemini, you've got, you're intelligent, and then like going through this, and then it's, oh, wait a second. And so, having that training and having access to that, you see like very tangible performance improvement, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, I think it's so important in this data too, because And I think you hit a really good point here, and a personal, like, I don't want to say pet peeve, but like, be in my bonnet or whatnot, is that like we really wanted learning to be more than completion, right? Like, yes, this would be great. Everybody does it. I love our completion numbers. Like I said, they're so high. And completions are fabulous. And that's a great way to track. But I think you really have to push yourself and look at it as like, how is it benefiting the employee? Like what is it doing there from a measurement? So honestly, their skill data, and what's it doing for the company? So those are really how we're trying to get to, is this training beneficial, and where does it sit within those three things? Like, it's fabulous when people like it. I love a good NPS score. It makes me feel really great that we designed a good program. But is it bringing that benefit to the company? Is it bringing benefits to the people who are in it? So we're really trying to push of, what are the levers that we can measure that way? And these skills reports are a really good way for us to see it from an individual employee standpoint.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm going to shift gears a little bit here for the audience, because I think one area that we're really excited about at ETU, and thinking about that data and where to go next with the data, combining a lot of what we had talked about, and how do you go faster? How do you, take what matters today and act on it? And so with some of the advancements in AI and, kind of what we can do and we've been able to do within our platform is really speed up a way for our customers to say like, okay, well, I've got a small cohort right here, and I need to do something here. So, if I look at like this emotional intelligence group that, scored low on the first side, like, the 56%, if I said, well, wait a second, they're going to need significantly more training. That's surprising. Maybe in digging deeper into the trend, there's a geographic consistency, or there's like a cohort, consistency. And maybe this is a group that we want to do something. So, we hear a lot, hey, we love the modality, we love simulations. Like, how do we go faster? How do we do something that's really tailored for them? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the audience just a little bit of a preview in terms of where we're going with our platform, and what that's going to look like going forward with ETU Create. And so ETU Create, this is going to be released later this year. And, it's going to give people the ability to create, an elegant custom simulation based on, what they need within, 30 minutes. And I think, leveraging the power of AI and, all the work over 10 years of mapping competencies to skills and developing skills and, kind of taking where technology has gone, we can help people get granular. So, we have the expertise to work on something like Moments That Matter with Capgemini and build something really big for a large audience. But for that small audience to say, hey, I want to do something, I want to leverage AI, I want to get it out quickly, how would you do that? So taking a look at this, there's really 4 steps to the process within ETU Create to get to the point of, hey, I've got a gap that's here that I want to address with a specific group of people and build them a simulation with synthetic media. So, right now I'm gonna, kind of default to some basic pieces here, but everything you see is free form. So it's not the kind of thing where you're limited to, a specific topic, or you're limited to an industry. We're gonna use some that would apply to the Capgemini team, but I'm just gonna walk everyone through, hey, how would I do this? I've got a small group of people, or maybe a mid-sized group of people, or even a large group of people that I want to address with a simulation topic, and I want to build it quickly. So, right here, I'm gonna start this, and let's just say there's something, related to leadership. We'll go giving feedback. Click right here, leadership giving feedback, and talking with Capgemini. So let's make this professional services. And now let's say this is somebody who is maybe a little bit farther along, right? You talked about, kind of the early stage career, maybe at the manager level. Oops. Go right here. Let's pick a senior manager level. And then we'll keep this at runtime. Now, it's interesting here. You have the ability to improve skills and measure learner skills. Most people say, hey, I want to do both. What the difference is, earlier when we showed the example of the simulation, there was a coach character that was on there. So if you just wanted to measure skills, I wanted to benchmark my team, say, hey, where do the skill gaps exist? You could turn the coach character off and just choose that you wanted to measure the skills instead of improving the skills. But you move here and you click next. This is going to recommend some skills. And so, what somebody would ask is, okay, well, where would something like this come from? And where this comes from is, really just, kind of the work that we've done within our platform over the last 10 years. And, these leveraging AI to say, all right, well, what are some skills in terms of giving feedback that I would want to see for a senior manager at a professional services skills? So I have the ability to switch these out and change the skills if I don't like these, but this is what's recommended based on, kind of everything that we would have within the training data that's there. Can move forward. Let's say I like this group of skills, click next. And then from here, it's going to show me a recommended scenario and characters. So, Ashley, you had talked about representation and the ability to change the characters within the platform. And, that's something that is available now. So if I said, wanted to change the Julia character, I can get a different character on the screen. Say that's going to look like Julia. I can take a look at the scenario that's here. And, really what this is, a learner's a mid-level manager and has a conference call to provide feedback to a team member who just had a client presentation that went badly. Pretty typical scenario, hey, like I went presented to a client, did not go well. And now I have to hear feedback from my manager. How do you do something like that? And that's not an easy thing for a lot of managers to go through, giving that honest feedback about what happened. So that sounds like a really good scenario to me. If I didn't like it, I could always suggest another one. I could type something in to change that up a little bit. Go here to click next. And then from here, it's going to create an outline of the simulation. So that'll give me the opportunity to review the outline. And what this looks like, these different level overviews, I think for the audience, you think about something like this as, all right, what are the scenes in a simulation? So what does this look like in terms of how the learner is going to engage with this and what they're actually going to go through? So, it's going to be, here's where the learner starts, acknowledging the effort for the team member put into the presentation, easing into the feedback to say, hey, you did a really nice job. I know you tried really hard there. And then kind of working through that process of, all right, how would you have one of those conversations in terms of giving feedback and having the simulated experience to see like, what should I do in this situation? And, the branching technology within the ETU platform gives, the opportunity for a manager who doesn't necessarily know how to handle that. If they answer suboptimally, the coaching character will give them the feedback to say, hey, that's not the best answer. And, from there, you can dig in a little bit deeper to say, where should we go to help develop these skills? Say I'm happy with the outline. I can go ahead and preview the media, take a look at it. There's Scott, my character. I think that's going to look good. So from here, I'm just going to close this out. And then from here, I can create my media. So the request is in progress. This is going to go a little bit faster just in kind of like the demo environment. Normally, this would take 20 to 30 minutes or so in creating the actual synthetic media. But, go through the process here. The media is created, and then I have the ability to publish the simulation. So I can change the name, giving feedback for growth. And let's say I'm happy with that name. Click publish here. And then this published simulation is available. So I have the ability to push this out within my LMS to everybody on my team that I would want to have access to something like this. So I think, leveraging AI, saying like, hey, how do I get something done quickly that's targeted, that's very specific to a group of people that I can push out. That's really how, we think about leveraging AI and, taking advantage of all the things that a simulation can do to get something out quickly, efficiently, and that could really engage the learner through an immersive simulation. So for the audience, what I will say is that this actual simulation that I created on the fly, we're going to make this available. So, when the recording of the webinar goes out, we'll also, send a link to everybody that has the ability for people to go on to the ETU website and take a look at this and go through this for themselves and see, hey, here's what an experience looks like. Here's what an AI generated simulation looks like. And people can kind of see for themselves, like, okay, well, what could I create leveraging AI that can be beneficial to my team?
I really love this one. I mean, I can think of tons of use cases that we can use this for, and the quickness of it. I think that that's really how you stay up to speed and evolve with how fast skills change and how fast needs change, and being able to edit it too to make it like specific to your need. I think that that's a big win. in terms of
Yeah,
simulations
thank
and
you. Yeah,
offering that?
it's something we're so excited about, and this is something we're kind of in beta testing with some customers right now that'll be released later this year to the masses. And so that the quickness I think is the biggest thing. Like needing to go faster. We just hear it over and over again. By the time if I spend 6 months on something, it's going to be obsolete. But this is something that we want to address quickly. So I think that that's really critical. And having the lots of use cases, the flexibility for everybody. How do I get something that's past traditional e-learning that can make it more immersive, more interactive, and valuable to the team members. Kind of closing thoughts, for the the audience. How do you leverage AI to upskill your team members? There's a couple different groups of AI that's there. Obviously we've got generative AI. Some of the names that everybody knows. There are things out there like AI coaching. Chatbots that are out there from just tools and software perspectives. I mean, I think you see AI in a lot more places than you did previously. And obviously, I got to put the plug in for immersive simulations and skills data. Like that's one really good way to leverage AI and upskilling your team members. I think thinking about whether it's ETU or something else where you could say like, hey, here's a simulated experience. One area where we don't necessarily play, but I know that their simulations can have a lot of utility is in for like healthcare, for example, for people going in and practicing surgeries and things like that. There's some great companies out there that can help learners that are trying that from a medical perspective. And, that's just another area where, hey, this immersive simulation and getting data around that can be really valuable. So with that, Ashley, really want to say thank you for taking some time to have this conversation with us today. To the audience, we would love for you all to try an ETU simulation. We've got the link on the bottom here that we can put into the chat. But we think this, this program that you guys put together is a really great one. And, this is such a important topic in thinking about, how L&D professionals can really leverage the use of AI and technology to start building out those skills and then, pushing toward ROI. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. To the audience, thank you so much for attending. Really appreciate everybody in the chat. I saw a lot going in and out. So thank you to everybody who got their questions answered. If there isn't anything that was answered, happy to go through and provide some direct follow-up to anybody. Certainly our contact information is up there. But, thanks again, Ashley. This was really great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Always happy to discuss what we're doing. And I think it's really, really powerful, the ability of what people can gain out of simulations and being able to have that fail-safe experience as well.
Yeah, definitely.